Hey everybody, welcome back to this week's episode of Spartan Shadows. I'm one of your hosts, Chris, and we're going to dive into everything MSU football related. We're going to recap the Florida Atlantic game week 1, come up with a little bit of some takes from what we thought and how the game went, and then we will go jumping in right into a preview of Maryland, who is on the clock for week 2, our first true road game for the Spartans. And just kind of sum up all things football, get you ready for kickoff on Saturday. So, guys, welcome in.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Definitely coming off of a 16-10 win. Maybe not the way we wanted it to go, but what matters is that you're 1-0 to begin the year, which is where Michigan State wants to be. Might have not been the best game we've ever seen, but honestly, ironically, it was probably the most Michigan State game we've seen in the last couple of years. So just happy to get the win, happy to talk about it, and I'm sure we'll get into the game a little bit more coming up here shortly.
Yeah, it was a game of all time. Is the best I can say. In the press box, I was nervous. By the end of the game, I was just glad we came out of there with a win. I mean, in the win column, no matter if we won 50-7 like Maryland did against their opponent, which we'll be covering soon, we're still 1-0 in the score column, so that's all we need right now. Just it could have been the best for us to have a wake-up call like that we're not going to be able to just cruise. Could be the hope, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we all kind of summarized it, but it's sloppy, or it was a little sloppier than we thought. Unfortunately, some issues on both ends just with execution and everything. And so a lot to clean up moving forward, a lot to potentially get fixed for this week. Just kind of touching base with a couple of things. My keys, I guess I'll start positively, of course, because I'm glass half full type of person. So I will start with the positives. I want to kick off with Cron Lynch Adams. KLA was the real deal. He seemed to be really kind of that difference maker we were looking for in the backfield, and he really set the tone running. I know he had the big touchdown run, but other than that, even the small runs, instead of it going from 2-3 yard runs, he all of a sudden bust them into 4, 5, 6 yard runs, and that's helpful when we're trying to establish a run game. The defense, I thought, played really hard, really fast. They were flying to the ball. Of course, they got a little overzealous at times with some of the late hits and everything. I know that was a little bit skewed because of the way Cam Fancher was sliding and some of the calls, but overall, I thought they really circled to the ball well and tackled well. Weren't too many missed tackles, so that was good to see. That's going to be key moving forward. We'll talk about that in a little bit, of course. But, I thought the defense played really really quick and with real intent. Another positive I had, Ryan Eckley, our punter. I'm glad to see, I know it seems kind of trivial, teams don't often think about it, but having a good punter can really help, and I think that was what really kind of set the tone. We pinned FAU down on the 1 on a punt, and that sprung the ability to get that safety to lead the game off, and it really kind of set the tone. And Jonathan Smith even said it in his press conference after the game, saying that really helped flip the script for them and get them rolling, and things like that. When we have a defensive line that was getting as much pressure as we did last week, which will lead me into my next point here in a second. A punter who can pin you deep and then all of a sudden get your defensive line moving and getting pressure, that's a good recipe. So Ryan Eckley did a really good job this week, and I got to shout him out because, punters don't get enough love. And then my last positive, like I said, defensive line, trying to get some pressure on Cam Fancher. I think they did a really good job. We had a ton of sacks, ton of pressures, ton of hits on the quarterback. So anytime you're able to do that, rushes the quarterback, allows them to have to speed up a little bit, maybe escape the pocket. I mean, you guys all know it's good things come from getting to the quarterback. So I thought they did a really good job, and hopefully that can continue moving forward. What are some other positives you guys had?
I think you kind of addressed a lot of them. I think there were some here and there that you didn't really talk about, but I want to kind of go into a little bit more of what you're talking about. And we can start with Karen Lynch Adams. I thought he was showing a little bit more than what we've seen from the running back position since Kenneth Walker. Not saying he's Kenneth Walker by any means, but you kind of saw him. One was able to find the holes. I thought he did a lot better at finding all the holes than Nate Carter did, and Nate Carter is a good running back. You also got to give credit to Tanner Miller from that great block that basically opened up the 55-plus yard touchdown from Karen Lynch Adams. So you have to give credit there to him as well. But like I was saying at the beginning, this was the most Michigan State way to start the game. Was the first points of the year goes to Daquan Dowse on a safety. Like I can't remember the year, but I think it was like one of the great defenses. I believe had a safety to start out the season. I believe in the early 2010s, or at least I know they had at least one really early on in the season. So kind of ironic that we talked about how the defensive line was kind of one of the big question marks of this team, and they come out in this game and do a very good job of one pressure, but also did a pretty good job of keeping Cam Fancher in the pocket for the most part. I know that he had one of the most, if not the most, rushing yards for FAU in this game. But that defensive line, especially like Kent Halley, Jalen Thompson, Chris Bogle, they did a great job. Corners as well. I thought Ed Wood looks really good. Secondary overall, I thought looked really good. We'll talk a little bit about the secondary a little later on, kind of transitioning into the Maryland game. But overall, I honestly thought that Michigan State had some bright spots in this game. And while some people were a little bit more upset with the offensive line play, I didn't think the offensive line really played that awful. If you really look at the PFF grades, yeah. I know PFF does not always mean like, hey, you had a great game, but it's a decent kind of grading point to see what this offensive line did. And I'm not saying they played a great game. I'm not saying they're the next great offensive line, but there was points in there that the offensive line looked really good, and it was only about one or two blocks away from a really big play. And there's some players offensively on the offensive line that didn't play extremely well, and I hate kind of calling out some of those players. But Brandon Baldwin, I don't think played extremely well. I believe he was one of the lowest grading offensive lineman on this team from this last game. He's your tackle, but then you also look at Ashton Lepo, Stan Ramola as well. Those kind of three basically subbed in for each other, and you look at those three, and they actually had pretty good pass coverage ratings, which actually Michigan State did extremely well in this game for the most part, outside of maybe some pass coverage here and there. But I thought that you covered what Michigan State did pretty well.
Yeah, I have the PFF numbers pulled up. That's what I've been doing with my computer during your guys' talks. So looking at the grades, Ashton Lepo led us for pass blocking on PFF at 88.5. And another guy who played extremely well, and I noticed this, he passed the eye test on Friday night, was Christian Phillips. He had the highest offensive rating of any lineman at an 80.9, 87.3 run block, 86.5 pass block. I remember there were a couple plays where we'd be tackled in the backfield, but Phillips would be pancaking a guy. So if it wasn't for Dowse recording the safety and being disruptive on the interior, I think Christian Phillips could have been named lineman of the week. Speaking of that, the MSU named players of the game were Karen Lynch Adams at running back, no surprise, with his 101 rush yards. Cal Halliday on defense at linebacker. Caden Chickle, the long snapper, for 2 tackles on special teams. And Dowse, as mentioned, at the lineman of the game. All of these guys played really good. Christian Phillips, I would say, would be one of the unsung heroes. And actually the other guy is, for me, another one of the big positives was Michael Masunas. A lot of us had the tight end as tight end 3 in our projected depth charts behind Parachek and Jack Velling. But Masunas had a quiet game, leading us with 29 receiving yards. And then also, he had a 80.7 run block grade, which was the best of all skill position players besides one, and then the highest offensive grade of any player on the team on Friday night. So Matsuna's impressed me. We had a couple toss plays where he would take the guy out of the play after going in motion, and that sprung, I think, Carter's best run of the night. So Masunas and Phillips were huge positives for me. And one more thing for grades, I know, analytics nerd. Nick Marsh had the highest run block grade of all skill position players at an 82.7 on his 9 attempts. So that was impressive. I did not realize that until I had the grades pulled up from last night. So yeah, that was a statistic.
Right. Yeah, I thought Nick Marsh was good in his limited action. You guys know I've been team Nick Marsh all along, so of course I would like to see him get more playing time as much as we can. But I thought he did a really good job, especially in that regard. But yeah, overall, I like I said, some stuff that needs to be cleaned up. Some of the negatives, I hate to go a little negative, you know me, but I have to maybe look at some of my concerns or issues from the game really quickly. We kind of touched on it. It can't be overstated. The penalties, the turnovers, those were not good. I personally don't think this game should have really been that close with how we played and how Florida Atlantic played. But, 2 turnovers in the red zone, 3 total turnovers, 12 total penalties with, I think, 6 personal fouls. Just a lot of issues that are easy mistakes to clean up. Take care of the ball, play a little bit smarter, play a little bit with more thought behind your intent, and the penalties shouldn't last. Jonathan Smith, in his tenure at Oregon State, was one of the least penalized teams. First game, a lot of players' first games at Spartan Stadium. I think everything was dialed up just a little bit. Hopefully that corrects itself a little bit. And then the turnovers, obviously unfortunately you could tell at times it was Aiden Childs' first start, and I have no doubt he'll clean that up. I think he is normally a lot better with the ball, is better with his decision-making, and if you saw him after the game, he was borderline in tears. I know Emmett talked about it. He was there at the press conference, but he was so upset at himself. So I got no reason to believe he's not going to clean that up, and that'll lead to some turnovers being cut down and some better execution up front. The offensive line, I think, played okay overall. The run blocking at times was a little suspect. We mentioned it kind of. You saw certain runs, Nate Carter would get the ball and be instantly met. I'd like to see a little bit more push, on the run block, but I think that's just going to come with time. Again, we can't say it enough, 61 new players on this roster from last year. It's going to take some time to gel. I think I'd like to see Jack Velling get a little bit more involved. It's no necessarily shot on him. They did a really good job in Florida Atlantic taking him away. But hopefully, in future weeks, we see him become a little bit bigger part of the offense because he can be a difference maker at tight end. I kind of touched on the red zone efficiency, but you capitalized on a couple more of those red zone chances, and this game isn't particularly close down the stretch. And then the wide receivers overall, they got to do a better job of getting a little bit of separation. I think we'll talk about it a little bit with Maryland. They play a little bit more man, so hopefully maybe the receivers can take a bit of advantage on that. But overall, I struggle to see a lot of separation from the receivers, and I think that's what led to the issues in the passing game because Aiden was forced to make throws that were highly contested and smaller windows to throw into. So if you can get a little bit crisper on your routes and a little bit more separation away from the DBs, you give Aiden a little bit better of a target to throw into and hopefully lead to some more catches. So But yeah, overall, just some stuff to clean up, I think. Jonathan Smith touched on all this post game. I thought he did a really good job after his post game press conference in summarizing everything and saying, hey, it wasn't perfect. We got to clean a lot of stuff up, and I don't have any doubt that they will. Play calling, I thought it was right where I want it to be. I'm always a little bit more aggressive. Going for that fourth down in the fourth quarter, I don't know if that was necessarily the call, but I see why they did it. In theory, you would like to think your offense can convert a 4th and 2 and maybe put the game on ice, but it didn't happen. So, like Jonathan Smith said, hindsight's 2020. But I think I would have maybe elected to utilize our all-star kicker there and make it a 2-score game, but who knows? Can't always second guess those, but overall, a lot to clean up. But I think we will. Anything I missed, guys?
One thing to build on what you were saying for our offense not creating separation. A couple of things I noticed from up high in the press box was occasionally against zone coverage when Aiden Childs would scramble around, one or two of our receivers would end up running themselves into coverage and sitting in a zone where they're covered. And it led to a couple pass breakups, a couple risky passes, one that would bounce to a receiver. And I think that's something that they obviously would see on film and probably try to correct. Playing a man coverage heavy team like Maryland, we might not see those results for a week or two, but it's something worth noting. I'm interested to see if we can create more separation against man, considering, zone is the one where you would think separation might be better.
Yeah, and I think kind of going off of what the both of you guys are saying is Brian Lindgren actually talked a little bit about this kind of in today's press conference and basically said that going into this game that they're kind of expecting the zone a little bit, but they actually did kind of go a little bit man, and they did a very good job with covering Jack Valiant. He was kind of the first primary target for a lot of these plays. They did a very good job of covering him. So I do think this offense will get Jack Valiant a little bit more involved. But I think a lot of this kind of has to do with one thing is kind of chemistry with the wide receivers. I still think that they're kind of working on that. I think it's going to give it time. I think there were some throws that Aiden Childs had that you really saw the potential that he can be a very, very good quarterback here. You also saw his one touchdown that he had in this game was about an 11-yard run. That was a great play by him. Figured out that the pocket was kind of collapsing on him, made a play with his legs, scores the first touchdown at Michigan State for the year. Good call, Chris, on that. But overall, I think this game had kind of a lot coming down to kind of the coaching. And Chris, you talked about going for the 4th and 1 in the red zone to go up 2 scores in early fourth when it looked like FAU wasn't going to probably be able to score 2 times on this defense. It doesn't matter at the end of the day. You end up winning that game, but definitely something to focus on. But another thing is Brian Lindgren, and he talked a little bit about his play calling, and I would love to see him get some more rhythm throws with Aiden Childs. He did talk about that today as well, that when they kind of went more man, that kind of threw off their game plan. If you're an offensive coordinator and you're an offensive coordinator at Michigan State, I would hope that you would have some sort of play calls to kind of go against what you think are going to happen. It seemed like it was a lot of deep shots on a 3rd down, a lot of fades, which I think is what Oregon State fans were talking about, is that they take a lot of those deep shots on a 3rd and short, 3rd and medium. And if they convert, it's going to be really exciting, but he just wasn't hitting in this game. I do think he's going to be better. I think you guys both talked about that. He is going to be better. I think it's a chemistry thing. But the one thing I am interested in is this secondary, what the secondary is going to look like going forward, because according to Jonathan Smith in his recent press conference, Michigan State had 2 pretty big secondary injuries. They had Dylan Tatum that's going to be out the rest of this year. Khalil Majid sounds like he's going to be out for a while. You also have Alante Brown is going to be out for a while as well. So you're going to have Isaiah Johnson. You're going to have to Nick Marsh step up there. But secondary, you're kind of thin right there. And you're going up against a Maryland team that was a top 25 passing team in the country last year. Of course, you don't have Talia Tagovailoa there anymore to really worry about there. But it's definitely going into this game. I think it's going to be interesting to see what Michigan State does against a Maryland offense that has been great, a team that's gone to 3 straight bowl games under Mike Laxley. Going to be a starting quarterback is Billy Edwards Jr., which he does have the ability to run a little bit. He's not as athletic as Fancher is, but guess what? He has a bigger arm, and he has 2 wide receivers at Maryland that are just absolutely electric. You have Ty Felton. He had 7 catches for 178 yards, 2 touchdowns against UConn. You also had Caden Prather had 6 catches for 60 yards. So when you really think about this Maryland team the last couple of years, 1, they had a great quarterback, and 2, they had electric wide receivers. That's what they have again. So this secondary, you're really wondering what the secondary is going to be like. This upcoming week is the real test for Michigan State.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a good segue to get us right into the Maryland game. Maryland, for those who don't know, they won their first game against UConn. I believe it was 50-7, and so they are firing on all cylinders going into the game. What are some of the previews you guys have, or I guess keys to the game? What are you looking for from a Maryland team that is looking pretty good offensively?
The main thing for me is we are going to have to tackle. Chris and I both were talking about this before the podcast. They had a couple screenplays where they should have been stopped within 5 yards, went 25 yards, went 30 yards. One of them was a touchdown. So you got to tackle, you got to wrap up. We looked really good in the season opener against FAU, but obviously with new guys in, especially considering we are down Dylan and Majid, you have to have those new guys step up and make great tackles. Avion Gross was a guy who stepped up against FAU. He allowed 2 catches on his 3 targets. However, PFF still graded him pretty well. He had 2 tackles, so gonna have to look to a guy like Avion potentially. We're gonna have Malik Spencer back. He missed most of the game with the targeting penalty at the start, so that will help our secondary for sure. Tackling. One thing I did notice was their long snapper did not have a great game against UConn. Obviously, long snappers are more of one. You could have a one-off, but they missed an extra point. They had a couple low snaps. First field goal attempt of the game almost got blocked. So that was one thing I did notice watching them. Billy Edwards is first-year starter for them. He has been out to Maryland, I believe, his entire career. He looked really good. He had a couple pro-level throws that made you say, wow. I mean, Childs did too, but Edwards had a much cleaner game against UConn. And I would say UConn, FAU are similar territory this year. I don't see Florida Atlantic winning more than 3 games this year. Yeah, it's gonna be telling what we see. Some projections I saw have Maryland favored by 16.5, which I think is ridiculous, but it is worth noting that that's what some projections are projecting, a Maryland blowout. What about you, Zach? What did you see watching them?
Yeah, like I was saying a little bit earlier, I saw a offense that is primarily a passing offense, which has been what Maryland has been under Mike Laxley. Has been a passing offense, and the one area that Michigan State has struggled defensively, of course, is the secondary. So coming off of a game where the secondary performed really well is kind of encouraging, but also we do have to factor in Cam Fancher is, I think we can honestly say this at this point, is not a good thrower. He can't really throw the ball too well. I was actually listening to the Couch in the Room podcast, great podcast over there, and I think Graham Couch actually had a really good point, is that you really can't call yourself a quarterback if you can't throw the ball. And not trying to be too harsh on Cam Fancher, but could he really throw the ball that like he could throw it when he was wide open, but I think he was a lot more kind of a runner, and that is completely the opposite of what Billy Edwards Jr. is. He can run, but this is where I think Michigan State could have an interesting maybe advantage against Maryland, and I think that's the defensive line versus the offensive line. And I cannot honestly be saying that game 2 of this season coming in when we basically talked about that this defensive line was kind of a question mark. But this Maryland offensive line, it's full of transfers. So a lot of these guys are going to be playing their second game ever at Maryland. They do have a Georgia transfer, Aloy Ba. Their center is from Purdue, Josh Kallenberger. They have Ellen Huron as well. These guys are transfers, and while transfers we've seen work out, they still have to have that chemistry there. So if Michigan State's going to win this game, they're really going to have to get pressure on Billy Edwards, or you're really going to have your secondary step up and really not have a lot of kind of blown coverages. And I think that's what Michigan State did really well for the most part. I do think they had some kind of blown coverages later on in this game. I do think a lot of that has to do with like Dylan Tatum, Khalil Majid going out. I think you're going to have to kind of work on that a little bit. But if you don't get blown coverages, if you get pressure on Billy Edwards Jr., don't allow him to skate the pocket, I think there's a real possibility that you can try to mitigate what Maryland does. Do I think Michigan State's going to have to score a lot more than they did in this game to even have a chance? Yes. But I think against this defense of Maryland, if you can keep the ball in your hands, don't turn over the ball, I think you have a chance. And if you can actually convert in the red zone, unlike Michigan State did in the FAU, I think it could be a little bit of a closer game than 16 points. But you're going to have to score points in this game to win.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the turnovers, Zach, and limiting those. Watching some of the Maryland-UConn game, UConn gifted them a couple of possessions where Maryland took over on the plus 30, plus 25. So they were starting drives super close and already within field goal range. It's kind of hard for any defense to keep them off the score sheet when you're starting from there. And let's be honest, UConn's defense isn't quite what it was a couple years ago under DC coach Jaron Horton. So I think that if MSU can keep the ball, limit the turnovers, like I said, and tackling. Emmett hit it. That was my biggest point too. There were a couple of touchdowns where you see 5-yard outs, 5-yard screens that get broken for huge plays. Some even touchdowns. There was a couple of big play touchdowns that came through because of 4 or 5 missed tackles on one play. And so if we can keep the speedy receivers and their skill guys in front of our defensive backs, tackle when you get to the ball, like I said, fly to the ball, kind of how you were last week, just kind of comparing and contrasting. There was a noticeable difference of how quickly our defensive backs could get to FAU players compared to how quickly Maryland's players or receivers had time against UConn's players. So if we can do that, I think defensively we may be able to limit them a little bit more than what UConn did. I would think. Offense, it's just execution. Like I said, I hate to sound kind of like a broken record, but this is going to take time to fix. It became clear. I know we were all kind of hopeful that maybe Aiden would hit the ground running and all of the standout players that we got in the transfer portal and coming over would be, firing on all cylinders from the start. That's probably was a little bit over-exaggerated. It takes time to execute, to get chemistry together, to do all that. So hopefully this week's just another step. You've got a whole nother week of practice, got a whole nother week of competition. And, if they can play clean, not miss fire on some throws and some coverages, kind of maybe establish a little bit more of a run game and control the clock a little bit more, I think MSU can keep it a lot closer than a lot of people think. I don't know about maybe necessarily going in and winning. I could see it. I really could. It's just we've had such a small sample size from both teams. I kind of don't know where I expect yet. So I think most major sports books have it at MSU as an 8-point favorite roughly. Or I'm sorry, 8-point underdog roughly. I know some, like Emmett said, some of the fancy stats and some of the outliers show it as high as 16. We'll see where the money takes it, but Maryland should be favored. It's a home game. It's a tough environment out at College Park. I know Emmett gets to experience it for the first time this week because he's going to be out covering it for Spartan Shadows and for us. So super exciting. But I think it's doable. It's just MSU has to play a lot cleaner, a lot more cleaner.
Yeah, key to the victory certainly will be playing clean, avoiding penalties. To touch on what you said earlier, Chris, I did check, and we were 12 penalties for 140 yards against Florida Atlantic, which was nearly 3/4 of what the FAU offense put up last game. So it would have been a lot different if we didn't have those penalties. So got to clean that up. An encouraging sign I did notice was we didn't have many offensive penalties in terms of like holding, offensive pass interference, any discipline plays on that, but those refs were not calling holding, so maybe not the best, but yeah, I think a key to victory, stay disciplined. Last year, Nate Carter almost hit 100 yards against the defense, so
Yeah.
between KLA and Nick Carter, that would be an interesting one to watch, for sure.
Yeah, and this Michigan State team hasn't beat Maryland since 2021, so they lost 2 straight matchups going into this game. But overall, I do think we have to kind of say this UConn team does not have Dan Hurley walking through the door, not a Dan Hurley type coach.
Yeah.
If this was UConn basketball, maybe a little bit more of a concern. Definitely not UConn basketball by any means. So not saying that UConn is some sort of great team because it's UConn football. Like that is decent to a good year last year. Do I think this Maryland team is really good, has a real possibility of being really good, that will score a lot of points? I honestly do. I think this Maryland team has that ability to do that. Now, it always seems like Maryland performs really well early on in the season, and then once it gets to kind of October, November time, they kind of seem like they fall apart under Mike Loxley for the most part. But this is going to be a game that's going to be really interesting to watch for both sides of the ball. And you really look at last night's game against Boston College and Florida State. If you really look at that game, I think that could be maybe what Michigan State needs to kind of do to win this game is they need to be able to, one, run the ball, but they need to keep time of possession on their side. They kind of need to go back to the Michigan State of old where you just grinded the clock or you get 6, 7, 8-minute drives that just keep going over and over and over. And that's one thing that Boston College did really well last night against Florida State. And if Michigan State can do that in this game, kind of keep Maryland's offense off the field, I definitely think that will help. But for you guys, what's like your game predictions?
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it, Zach. And that's, to me, that's always one of the easiest ways to play football is if you can run the ball, control the clock, and then make some timely plays on defense. That's a great recipe to win. I think MSU is capable of it. I don't know if I necessarily will 100% say that's what's going to happen. I can kind of picture this game becoming more of an offensive shootout. That being said, I do think MSU has the weapons to maybe contend in that way too. I don't necessarily think that's a recipe for us to always win, but I think if the game opens up a little bit, and if we're executing the way we can, Aiden and the offense can keep pace with Maryland. So I think it's going to be closer than people think. I will say I think it's going to be a little bit more high scoring. I guess if you had to throw me on the spot with a score prediction, Give me maybe 34-31 Maryland right now. I don't want to do that. In my heart, I think MSU can actually win. I know I've kind of been the negative one this podcast, but I do think MSU has a chance to go in and win. They need to clean up a lot, and I just don't know if 1 week's time to do that is necessarily a reasonable ask. So for now, I'll say 34-31 Maryland. MSU makes it close and contends. And then hopefully it's a good building block for between that and week 3. We can build with prior review before we have to go back out to BC for the Red Bandana game.
Yeah, I agree with Chris that I think it's going to be close, but I think it's going to be closer than the sports books are saying, but I also have MSU likely losing this. I am predicting 28-21, 28-24, something like that. I think we can make it close. We can hold them on a couple of drives, but I do not think I'm hoping I'm wrong, but I don't see us pulling out a victory unless a lot of things change. And like Chris said, it is a very short time frame to expect everything to change. Also, September Maryland is always scary. They have been the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, when can we get Maryland in November? That never happens.
Yeah, they look like a national title contender for the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season, and then they just kind of fall off the cliff. And guess what team always has to play them early, it seems?
Yeah, I'm kind of the same point where you guys are. I think it's going to be a kind of closer-ish type game. I think I have a little bit further of a spread. I think it's going to be like 38-31 Maryland in this game. I think it's just going to be where Michigan State just needs a stop at the end to have an opportunity to tie the game. They just don't get it, and Maryland walks out with a win, and it's 1-1 back to East Lansing against a very, very bad team that if Michigan State doesn't put up 40-plus points again, I would be really, really concerned at that point. But I do think this offense will get going a little bit. I don't really see a win here. If they do get a win, great. I think that's looking really good. Then there's a real possibility that you start 4-0 on the schedule, 3-1 at the worst, because Michigan State isn't going to lose to Prairie via A&M.
We hope.
If they do, then Jonathan Smith should be fired. They literally lost like 27-9 against a team that is predicted to finish second to last in the SWAC, and they are predicted to finish second. So if that doesn't tell you anything, Michigan State should lose this game.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, like I said, we were on the optimist side, looking at 7-5 for the big picture year, maybe 8-4 if all things really went right. You can lose to Maryland and still go 7-5 because we said breaking it down into these segments. First 4 games, if you can somehow come out 3-1, that really sets you up pretty easily to make a bowl game, even with the gauntlet of the schedule in the middle of the year. So. Rutgers looked good, I know, towards the end of the year, but they're already starting to pile up some injuries, and I don't want to start breaking down every game again, but it sets you up to continue to maybe have success and build for the end of the year. So hopefully they get it right. Hopefully they can fix things and make enough plays to win this week. I am going to be rooting my butt off for it, but Maryland's looked good, especially in September, like Emmett has said in recent years, and that offense is high flying. So if we can contain it and make some plays, awesome.
Yeah, I think our defense has improved from last year already.
Same.
We saw 5 quarterback hurries and 7 sacks Friday night against FAU. In addition, Cam Fancher ended up with 25 carries, which we will not see from anyone besides maybe Dylan Gabriel if they have a bunch of read options, but we're not going to see 25 carries on Saturday for Billy Edwards. So that is going to help. It's going to put a lot more pressure on the defensive backs, which with injuries is going to be a concern. Worth noting, we did that with 12 quarterback hurries or sacks. We did that without Avery Dunn. he was out for that game. Gillison was also out for the game, so a couple players hopefully back from injury, and maybe we can try to get pressure. If we get to Billy Edwards early and often, I would feel a lot better about the game. But I do want to see how we look against a Big Ten offensive line as opposed to Florida Atlantic, which was relatively unexperienced.
Yeah, and speaking of small anomalies, too, I will say I know I was giving the receivers a little bit of flack earlier for not creating as much separation. I know Montori Foster did not have the best games. I'm pretty sure if you asked him, he would be the first one to admit that. I don't think he's going to have a game like that again. That was a rough start to the season, so I would think moving forward you're going to see a little bit more plays made by him, which will definitely help the receiving core as well. So really quick, guys, who do you think gets the well, I guess we can do this weekly, but who do you think gets the first MSU touchdown this week?
I'm feeling spicy. I could take the obvious pick of KLA or Nate Carter. I'm feeling pretty spicy. I think Nick Marsh gets the first collegiate touchdown to open the MSU scoring.
Nice. That'd be awesome.
You guys know that I'm a big fan of Jack Belling, so I'm just going to keep picking him until he gets me a big fan of Jack Belling. I like Masunas, but give me Belling.
Yeah, I mean that's probably going to pay off for you one of these weeks. It's just got to.
I have to be right 1 point. So
absolutely, I will not go with Aiden Childs, even though it worked so well for me last week. Hope somebody bet that after listening to the podcast, because you probably made a little bit of money off that. Give me. I don't necessarily want to take the safe way either, because I have a feeling the first touchdown is going to be a passing touchdown. You know what? I'll do this. I'll combine it. Give me KLA, but it's going to be a passing touchdown. I think he's going to catch a ball out of the backfield and score a receiving touchdown. So I'll say KLA. It would count if you did a rushing with the sports books. So maybe you want to hedge that a little bit and take that. But yeah, I'll take KLA for my pick. So. Guys, any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
Not to harp on this, but another thing to watch is going to be the return game. I know I said that last week, but now with Alante Brown, who was our scheduled primary returner, out, Nakai Martinez returned a punt against FAU. So I would say probably Martinez on punt return, and then kick returner is going to be probably one of Martinez, Isaiah Johnson, or one of our two running backs, because they were the only four taking returns. But that is something that I want to watch. Personally, I would prefer to see KLA on return because of how dynamic he was. And if we're going to start Carter over him, we might as well put a dynamic player on field, is my opinion.
Cue me pounding the table for Nick Marsh to still take over those reps at some points, too, because, I don't know. He can do it. I know he can. I watched him do it in high school. Right. He's really good. He's really dynamic. I mean, you can put me in for more reps than Nick Marsh for anything, so we'll just pound the table for that too. So, Zach, any final thoughts?
Yeah, just make sure to watch Michigan State at 3:30 on Saturday. That's all.
Yeah, 3:30 kick this week. What is it still on Big Ten Network or did it move to Fox? I can't remember.
Big Ten.
Big Ten Network. Okay.
Yeah, that's what the MSU email said. So,
perfect. And then
speaking of that, follow me on Twitter if you haven't already. I'll be covering the game live. So.
Yep. Emmett does some good.
Shadows will have. Oh, you go first, Chris.
Oh, I was gonna say, yeah. Emmett did some good things with his tweets during the game last week, and then had a nice on the field wrap up for us. I know I ended up tweeting it out from the podcast Twitter account, but follow him for fun stuff like that, and hopefully more this week, like you said.
Yeah, hoping to get either on field or from the press box. I'm hoping to be able to do that again for the Shadows Podcast account. So yeah, keep tuned to Twitter to hopefully see something like that.
Yep, and our socials are for the podcast are linked in the descriptions of everything that I upload. Our individual socials have been linked too, so follow us wherever. We try to blast everything out as much as we can. We are on Apple Podcast. I apologize. The first episode did not get up on there as quickly as it should have. Just know Apple and I are forever in a war with everything. It's dated back from time before time, since the Stone Age, really. But Apple and I were feuding, but we figured it out. So we're up on Apple, we're up on Spotify, YouTube. Maybe we'll venture into SoundCloud at some point. Whatever you guys want us to be, we'll explore that avenue. So check us out wherever you can. I think that's everything. Zach, you got anything else? All right. Well, we certainly appreciate you guys tuning in, following all the social engagement we've gotten so far. Continue to like, share, comment, everything on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever you guys follow us on. That all helps more than you guys know. We really, really, really appreciate it. If you have any future questions or things you want to hear us talk about, we do have our email address. I linked it somewhere on the descriptions of one of our pages. It is SpartanShadowsPodcast@gmail.com. Shoot us some questions. Maybe once we get out of the hecticness of the season or get into a better rhythm, maybe we can do some mailbag questions, stuff like that in the future. Hopefully have some guests coming on soon. We've got some good ideas in the works for that. And then, I think we'll be back probably around the same time next week to break down the Maryland game and then get you primed for Prairie View. And that's all we got. So thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you guys. And like always, go green.
Go away.
Go